and 314 for a shooting at Century Theaters. They're saying somebody's shooting in the auditorium.
Roger, keep your fires west of the smoke. You're cleared hot. An officer hit. Send me the world.
Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again.
Welcome to Tactical Tangents.
Hey, welcome back to Tactical Tangents. This is Mike and Jim. We got Jason Sweet with us as our guest tonight. What's up, Jason?
What's going on, Mike? How you doing? Thanks for having me on.
Jimbo, how are you?
I'm awesome.
Awesome. So Jason is he was a pararescueman in the Air Force, PJ for short. That's a job in the Air Force that I tried out for at one point in my life. They focus on combat search and rescue and personnel recovery. I'll let Jason build on that here in a minute. He also played for the University of Arizona. You were on the football team. What position?
I walked on as a running back, but I put on my walk-on packet. We'll take any position that helps the team. So they put me on defense, Mike.
So he was the dish boy, and
well said.
And what I realize is Jason probably doesn't know me well enough to know that I really am a great sports ball player. In that, I can't throw a football or catch one to save my life. And now Jason is working at he's a researcher at the University of Arizona in the Human Performance Lab. I don't even know where to start, Jason. Let's start with the pararescue stuff. Your dad was also a PJ, right?
He was, Mike. He was. He enlisted back in the 80s, mid-80s, and he got stationed at the 1730th Pararescue Squadron, which at the time was the only exclusive pararescue squadron, and that was at Eglin Air Force Base. The team evolved into what is now the 23rd Special Tactics Squadron out of Herbert Field there in the Panhandle of Florida, and that's where I was born and raised.
Nice.
Near and dear.
So how does, because you've told me some interesting stories about you and your dad. You were a PJ, your dad was a PJ, and at some point you guys got the opportunity to actually work together a little bit, right?
Yeah, we did. He actually re-enlisted at the age of 40 whenever I was going through the pipeline, and they originally had us on the same pararescue apprentice course class, and he had gone up to this accelerated paramedic course up in Boise, Idaho, and the idea of it was to get us on the same team to graduate at the same time. So we actually started the class together, and this was in 2011. But unfortunately, we found out after we started the class that the dad didn't pass the National Registry on the first go. So they set him back, and he had to go and rehack the National Registry. Now, like father, like son, I had to rehack that National Registry a few times too. But so took care of business, started off that class. He got set back, and I ended up graduating and receiving my beret from him at the graduation ceremony. He graduated the class behind me, and I got to hand him my beret at his graduation ceremony. Pretty incredible experience, Mike and Jim.
That's awesome. So for those who don't know pararescue stuff, their focus is rescue, and if it wasn't clear from that discussion, they're also typically full-up paramedics, and it is an incredibly intense process just to become a pararescueman. I don't like to compare career fields, and no one ever does, but it's the closest thing the Air Force does to like SEAL training as far as the intensity and the water confidence drills that you go through. It's a long pipeline, a year and a half, something like that.
Yeah, close to 2 years.
Yeah. And the attrition rate is traditionally very high. Lots of people go into the Air Force thinking they're going to be PJs, and then they end up being the guys who scrape the bird poop off the airplanes. And so it's an intense experience, and the guys who make it are no joke elite in every possible way. And it's not just about the physical stuff, right? There's also a big mental component to it. Can you guys talk to that real quick?
Yeah, Mike, you want to touch on that, the resiliency component?
Well, I mean, where do I begin? So I've mentioned it maybe a little bit on this podcast before, but I enlisted into the Air Force, and I was part of that attrition that Jim talks about, the guys that didn't make it. I made it through some of the early phases of the selection program, and what I can tell you, there's a lot of life lessons that were kind of tied into that, and the biggest takeaway is that you could be a PT stud, you could be a gym rat, you could be a personal trainer, you could be, I don't know, a football star in high school or college, and that doesn't mean that you're going to make it through that program. And I can't speak to the rest of the pipeline, and pipeline is the term that they use for the entire curriculum. So it's 8 different schools, right, Jason?
Sounds about right.
Yeah, I mean, so you're going through, after basic training, if you enlist from the get-go, you're going through the indoctrination course, which is like the selection, and then you've got jump school, free fall school, dive school, SEER, underwater egress, paramedic school, the apprentice course. Missing anything?
No, and keep in mind, the idea is by the time you have got through this indoctrination course and graduated that course, you have what it takes to get through the pipeline and be a pararescueman. So you don't typically see people drop out for the lack of ability to accomplish a task once you get through indoctrination. So indoctrination, you're looking at classes of typically 80 to 100 men, and you're looking at graduating anywhere between as much as 0, as we've heard, up to 15 guys typically. So you're looking at a 90% attrition rate historically in the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And the ultimate goal is to produce a dude who can be versatile enough and trained enough that they can hang with a SEAL team as their medic, who can hang with Rangers as their medic, who can parachute in or rappel in or fast rope in to anywhere on Earth, execute a high angle rescue on the side of a mountain, and pull typically a pilot, but not always a pilot, the isolated person, military people who are stuck somewhere or captured somewhere, and get them out of harm's way. And that's a no-fail job, and it's a duty that the Air Force has to its air crew and that the military has to all of its people.
I have two points on that. The first thing is, I remember when I was going through Indoc, and I got an email from Jim, back in the day. Jim was my mentor. He was, trying to keep me motivated. He was at the academy, and I got an email from him that was just like, when the going gets tough, just think about pulling my dumb ass out of a wreckage somewhere in the middle of the desert, or think of titties. It was like the exact email.
I used to just think of my dad's face going home if I were to quit.
Yeah. Well, that's
I don't think I'd be welcome in the front door.
Whatever it takes. If it takes titties, that's what you use. If it's your dad's face, that's what you use. Whatever gets you through.
The second thing I remember, though, is, and Jim hit it on the head, is that the Air Force owes it to their guys. One of our instructors, Jason, was Mr. Newman there when you were there?
Of course.
Tom Newman.
Superhuman Newman.
So he was is an Air Force Cross recipient. And during my class, we actually got to meet the guy that he rescued in Vietnam.
That's incredible.
Which was pretty cool. He was a pilot. He got shot down. He was by himself in the jungle, and these dudes were closing in on their position. And Tom Newman got lowered in by helicopter, told them to leave, told the aircraft to leave because they were giving away their spot. And so all these Vietnamese were closing in on him, and so he told them to go. And then once they were getting close, he was able to find the pilot and ultimately get him out of there, hoisted him out, and was taking a whole bunch of rounds. So he was shielding the guy with his own body as he got hoisted out of the jungle. And one of the things that the guy that he rescued, and I can't remember his name, but one of the things that he explained to us was how big of a deal it was to know for him as a pilot that if he got shot down, that there were some dudes coming for him, and that the Air Force would do everything that it could to get him out of there. And I think that's a testament to the type of person that gets it through. Because, and Jason, you could correct me if I'm wrong, but just because you happen to be the one that finds an award, acts of heroism like that happen all the time, right?
Yeah, and I think it's something to say about our country as well. We're one of the few countries in this world that invest a lot of money and a lot of time and a lot of training into rescuing our own and bringing back everybody off the battlefield and supplying those resources at all costs that others may live. And that is the pararescue motto: these things we do that others may live. You've got to be willing to put your life on the line and put yourself in the most austere and non-conventional situations to be able to put somebody off the battlefield into a hospital and back home. I think that you touched on it earlier, Jim. One of the most valuable reasons to have a PJ on a SEAL team or a Green Beret team isn't necessarily the medical skills, because Green Berets and SEALs, they do supply their own medics. So whenever you have a PJ on a team, the idea is when a man goes down, somebody has to be able to direct the entire rescue effort, whether that be surveying a landing zone and determining whether or not that landing zone is suffice for aircraft to land, or determining whether the patient or patients are severe, ambulatory, non-ambulatory, who needs to go out first, where security needs to be set up, etc. So it's really about directing the overall rescue effort and being the guy that people can go to know how to get that man or that woman off the battlefield expediently.
I think that's a big thing that I've noticed. Just, I work in an urban setting. The evacuation times are not very long. It's not combat, but when we think about rescue planning, it goes beyond just what treatment am I going to provide. It's also what resources am I going to need? Do I need to call a helicopter for where I'm at? Do I need to call? Is it just an ambulance? Is that going to work? Should I just throw them in the back of the truck and drive them? And
so also skills in extrication, right? That PJs typically get quite a bit of being able to dismantle a vehicle to get a guy out.
Right, and that comes down to having a good 9-liner, a good survey of the mission you're going into and knowing whether or not you're going to bring that equipment. So if you're on a SEAL team and you know that an extrication mission is coming, you're obviously going to stick that gear on your person versus just being ready for everything. Going on a patrol, you may not necessarily have that gear, but you'll be able to direct a team in that has that gear, and you'll be able to direct that effort to get that patient extricated.
Awesome. We could talk about PJ stuff all night long, and I love it. I dig it. I don't know if everyone else will be as into it.
I have a warm, fuzzy place in my heart, of course, too. I flew rescue back in the day. I was the guy who dropped the PJs and sometimes picking them back up and stuff. So that's my favorite topic. But I understand you do other stuff, too. You play football. You
played a little football. That ended about as quick as it started with the injury. But I walked on in 2014. And was blessed enough to play in the Fiesta Bowl and the Pac-12 championship. Got our butts kicked by Oregon, unfortunately, in that Pac-12 championship. Pretty banged up. But we made it to the Fiesta Bowl that year. Incredible experience. Lost to Boise in the fourth quarter. But being able to play with guys like Scooby Wright, Derek Turi, Anu Solomon, Nick Wilson, incredible group of dudes. So was very blessed to have that experience. Tore my ACL in 2015. Got to stick around on the squad, be a part of the team, and actually got cleared to practice against ASU, and then got cleared to practice in the New Mexico Bowl in 2015, but just couldn't hack it with the recovery after that.
How would you compare the physical strain between serious college football and PJ stuff? Is there any comparison or?
Yeah, great question, Jim. If you look at the stats, the average play in football is about 6 seconds. And if you look at the PJ yearly conventional test to see whether or not you're in the shape you need to be in, which is called the AFSOC test, Air Force Special Operations Command test. You're looking at a 3-mile run, a 1,500-meter swim, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups for time, a ruck, etc. So these are all activities that involve 20-plus minutes of constant cardio versus football being an average play of 6 seconds.
Unless it's me running one of those exercises, and then it's
10 minutes.
Hour and a half.
45.
A 10-second 40-yard dash. But yeah, you get the point. So you're looking at distances of 40 yards, 60 yards, doing 400-meter sprints and whatnot versus distances of 1.5 miles, 3 miles. So you're looking at a racehorse versus an endurance athlete, definitely for football versus special operations forces.
What about what else are they looking at in terms of selection? Can you walk us through, I don't know, the recruiting process? You say you walked on. Again, I'm not a sports ball guy, but how hard is it to get onto a college football team? How hard is it? Let me back up for a second. You joined you joined the U of A football team after your time in the Air Force, right?
I did.
So what about the kind of selection process going into U of A and trying to get on the football team and go back to school compared to NDOC, for example?
Well, NDOC to me was 60 to 70% mental, and getting on the U of A football team was about 90 to 95% physical.
Interesting.
So there was a large difference. Getting on the football team, they're evaluating your speed, they're evaluating your aggressiveness, your ability to cover, your ability to use your hips to explode 9 to 10 yards as quick as possible, cover 2 to 3 yards as efficiently as possible. They're judging your footwork, your flexibility, etc. Versus in pararescue, they're analyzing your ability to lead, to communicate, to be comfortable underwater, to be able to ruck with weight on your back for a long distance, etc. So you're looking at very different demands for those two different types of athletes.
The way you word it makes it sound a lot more subjective versus objective. And my question is, and this might lead us into our next topic, which is you work at the U of A now in the Human Performance Lab, researching human performance. What do you think, in terms of metrics, you're trying to measure or select a person is reliable? I mean, because you've got the job demands, right? The job demands, let's say in football, require that you can cover this distance or you can move a certain way and do all these very measurable tasks, as the way you describe it, right? And in pararescue, some of that is more, well, how are you going to deal with challenge? How are you going to deal with adversity? How are you going to deal with being in an uncomfortable position or under a physical demand that you maybe can't meet?
Right. So I think it starts with the tryout and the assessment process and how strong that is. And if you analyze the assessment process for pararescue versus the assessment process for Division I football, they're drastically different. And in Division I football, they're most concerned with your 40-yard dash time, and that's your speed. And so if you see somebody like a Khalil Tate, for example, for the University of Arizona quarterback, he ran a 4.82 40-yard dash whenever I was at the University of Arizona. Not a super impressive 40-yard dash time, but if you watch him on the field, he outruns almost everybody on the field when he gets in the open. So how do you analyze somebody's on-field play and their game day play and their game day speed when they're not showing it on the 40-yard dash? It's almost impossible. So when it comes down to assessing an athlete, there has to be tangibles, but there also has to be the ability for a coach or a scout to analyze something deeper. And when you go to the pararescue test and you go to any type of special operations pass test, you're typically looking at a universal DOD requirement, and that is a 1.5-mile run, 500-meter swim for jobs like SEAL, pararescue, combat control, push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups for a max time in 2 minutes. So do push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, an above-the-surface swim, and a run on a track, evaluate and analyze somebody's ability to operate efficiently? I don't know if it does. However, the DOD has to have some type of bare minimum standard to give somebody entry. So really what it comes down to is being able to analyze somebody as quickly as possible and assess them and say, do they have what it takes to be a Division I football player? Do they have what it takes to be a Navy SEAL, a pararescueman, a combat controller, a Green Beret? And the DOD is really vamping up those standards right now and look to see a lot of changes in 2019 on assessment tests.
That's going to be some good stuff to hopefully get into in a little bit, if you're allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So after you graduated and got your bachelor's at University of Arizona, you've gone on to do research in human performance, and that's a pretty wide field. And it's something we're very interested in Tactical Tangents, is how do you get better performance out of people? What is the focus of your studies on that?
Right. So I think it's important that we define human performance for our listeners first, because there's always a gray area definition on that. And to me personally, human performance means the act of analyzing data and developing a process for assessing somebody at what they do and applying intervention for making them better at what they do. So human performance, particularly at the U of A and the effort around the U of A, is based around health and wellness. And the particular office that I work under is physician dominant. And so they're looking at sleep analysis and communication analysis and the ability to boost the physician's workability and boost the ability of a physician to be better at their job. So what I have challenged this department to do is branch off into the DOD, especially Joint Special Operations Command, United Special Operations Command, and work with the warfighter and the tacticianer on performance.
I think it's interesting because if you think about the job of a physician, and let me make sure that I understood everything you told me. So the performance of a doctor to carry out their function, and let's go with the, I'm a doctor, and I've got a regular patient that comes into my office, and I've got to make certain decisions about this guy's care or, assessment or treatment of whatever ailment that he's complaining of. Versus an emergency room doctor or a trauma surgeon, for example, who comes in and now you're on call, you're maybe middle of the night, 3 a.m., you're getting this call that some guy shot up or whatever, and you've got to go in and try to operate on this dude to save his life. So you're making time-sensitive, critical decisions under pressure. And so you're talking about their performance, or I guess what your job is kind of centric around right now is their job performance in those types of circumstances, right? Is that kind of...
And most of these career fields, Mike and Jim, they're critically undermanned. And so they have to find a way to get more output out of what they have, whether it be being able to work better with less sleep, or whether it be to communicate better with the teammates that they have to figure out how to take what they have and make more out of it without necessarily getting more people into their career field.
Yeah, and I think that's hugely relevant to obviously the special operations in any of the special operations career fields, but being a pilot, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, being a cop, being any of those things, right?
And as you can imagine, and Jason, you're welcome to jump in on this. This has gone a lot of different directions over the years. This has been the military has messed with go pills to try to help people function even on very little sleep. And we've had some bad outcomes off of those. We've had...
I assume go pills, you mean like caffeine? Is that...
at minimum caffeine. Just stimulants of various
You get
forms.
prescribed amphetamines before you go down
Yeah,
range.
I was going to say meth. All right. Get
So
some.
we've seen efforts like that. We've seen nutrition efforts. We've seen workout efforts. If guys are just more fit, then they'll do better.
This has all been very serious. Can I just pause for that? Did you say that you get prescribed amphetamines before you go on a deployment?
I did. Now, we did not take them, and there would be some serious paperwork if we did. However, yes,
You could.
uppers and downers.
Yep.
So like, do you like crush it up and like melt it into a...
A spoon, K-bar.
No, you just rub a little inside your lip. But that's actually famous. If you watch the movie Doctor Strangelove, they actually talk about it when they're going through the emergency survival kit. Like, that's been a thing in militaries for 50, 60, 100 years, is go pills, speed pills of various forms. So that's a thing we played with, because sleep deprivation is part of combat. We've played with nutrition, fitness. There's a national lab, at least one national lab right now, that is working on transcranial electric shock. So literally just wiring guys to electrodes and running a current through their brains to make their brains function better. That's a real thing that there's real federal money going toward.
Wake up, mother...
Yeah,
the theory is it's going to help them memorize stuff. So kind of interesting.
I can guarantee it's going to wake them up.
The biggest thing that we're trying to do is take findings and take good observation and be able to back it up with data. So we'll take the pararescue pipeline, for example. We've seen time and time again that underwater swims, buddy breathing, which is where you pass a snorkel back and forth while you're getting harassed in the water and splashed and getting your mask flooded and water dunked down in your snorkel, whatever it is, exercises under the water continuously show and continuously weed people out that, quote, shouldn't be there. Why does the water expose these type of weaknesses? Why does the water filter out people that don't want it bad enough per se? Well, we have to be able to back that up through data. And obviously, whenever you can't breathe, it makes you extremely uncomfortable. We know that. But how can we find psychological connections to that through behavioral psychology data or through performance data that proves that water confidence is necessary for a pararescueman and is necessary in the pipeline to screen for what it takes to be a pararescueman?
I have a rough theory on that I'm hoping you're going to debunk. Myth bust me, Jason.
Let's do it.
What I've seen, and this is something that I saw it when I went to NDOC, and I've also seen it as my job, has carried me now into SWAT selection processes. You get a guy who is very physically fit, very strong, and you put them in a situation where self-preservation becomes a factor. So you're in a realm where physically you can handle the physical demand, right? You can handle the 1.5 mile run time or the obstacle course or whatever event that it is that there's a very objective standard for. But the minute that you're put in a position that you're either uncomfortable or and this is where I think the water comes into it, there's an element of self-preservation that comes with not being able to breathe. And now there's very little physical component there, right? I mean, that is a very
I just want to
mental
stop
component.
everyone and think about the deep thought that was, that if you can't breathe, it affects your sense of self-preservation.
Yeah. And
Wow.
like a sympathetic nervous response, right? Yeah. Dealing with stress, if we're talking about survival, fight or flight, right? Dealing with stress is a sympathetic nervous response. And that is motivated by self-preservation, right? And on one end of the spectrum, this is something I tell the cops. And if Jason can debunk me here, this is great. But on one end of the spectrum, you have being embarrassed. You don't want to look bad in front of your friends, right? And so when people get embarrassed or called out in front of their friends, they have like those defense mechanisms that go up. They get defensive. They get kind of irrational. And on the other end of the spectrum is, I'm going to die right now and I'm in a full-blown panic, And you see very physically fit dudes that are totally capable of doing this exercise, the physical part of it, but mentally, that's the disconnect, right? Is the panic and the self-preservation. They get that survival stuff kicks in and they're like, I can't do it. I got to go.
Yeah, Mike and Jim, and it comes down to this: is athletes will train for the known. They'll train for the 1.5 mile run. They'll train for the push-ups. They'll train for the pull-ups. They'll train for the swim. They'll even train for the underwaters or the 40-yard dash, whatever it is. But you stick somebody under the water and you start taking their breath away, or you start giving them unknown factors. Now they are no longer in control, and they no longer have the known factor. So what I want to know when I'm assessing an athlete, and I'm going to see if they have what it takes, is if they are able and willing to tackle the unknown. And when I put them in a position like that, are they going to panic or are they going to be calm under pressure? And I think it all comes down to taking away the known factor. So many guys and females are good at preparing for the known. They can prepare in the gym, they can prepare on the track, they can prepare on the water. But as a cadre or as an instructor, when you take away that factor, how do they react? And that's the big question for me. And how do you quantify that into a test? And how do you quantify that to an assessment?
I like that. I like the fog and friction.
Yeah. So I want to pick your brain about some athletic performance stuff, but before I get into that, kind of the natural segue here would be the resilience and the mental toughness part of it that we're talking about kind of already, basically. But can you talk about the difference between the difficulty of selection? And this is I focus this kind of more on the PJ stuff than the football stuff, but the difference between how tough selection was versus how tough the job or the missions were. How well does it correlate? Does it correlate?
Well, as a PJ, you have to be ready to rescue anyone, anywhere, anytime, and that could particularly be the most intense, most impossible situation in the most austere and non-permissive environment there is. So you need to be ready for anything. In that particular case, as a PJ. So the training, I would say, was as intense as any mission that you could ever have. Obviously, there's not bullets flying. You're not carrying a weapon. You don't necessarily have somebody bleeding out next to you, but the situations and the assessments that they're giving you and the training, you can only hope will prepare you for those situations. And when I went to Afghanistan, I remember asking my instructors beforehand, how do I get ready for this? How do I prepare for this trauma? How do I prepare for patients? How do I prepare for combat? They said, we got you ready. You know all you need to know. You're ready. Now go over there and react.
And it worked.
And I would say it worked.
Yeah.
We did an effective job while we were there.
And I think, I guess and this is a different realm, right? I look at it from a law enforcement perspective because some of the more difficult positions that I've been in come from that. And I bet Jim's got some of these too, which he can chime in here in a second. But you're trying to make it look easy. I mean, you're trying to make the decisions on the job feel as normal as you can. So although like you said, you have to be ready for anything. You have to be ready for the worst of the worst of the worst case scenario, right? On the other hand, B is, yeah, but this isn't that. This is okay, yeah. This is a crappy situation, right? We've got this many patients. We're taking fire. We're, effective fire. We're getting shelled or bombed or whatever, and all these things are going on, but like, I got this. This is our priority. This is our casualty collection point. These are number of patients, their condition, whatever. So it's like, this is nothing that you haven't been able to prepare for, right? And like with cops, that's how I think of it, is like, I want the day-to-day bad to be easy compared to like the worst case scenario, right?
Yeah, I have a couple things on this. First off, one of my favorite sayings in special operations is, it's not about doing the weird stuff. The weird stuff is actually pretty easy. It's about getting the fundamentals right, even when things get weird.
Well
and
said.
Having those basics down so firmly that no stress or strain can erase them, I think is very, very important. The other is, all of my worst emergencies were not in the technical manual for my aircraft. All of them. I had one of the closest I ever came to dying was on a touch and go at Little Rock. I was the co-pilot. My aircraft commander, instructor pilot was demonstrating this touch and go, and all of a sudden, very, very low from the ground, or maybe 25 feet off the ground, I see we get really nose high and really slow, and that's not a good place to be because the wings stop working when you get there. And so we're about to pancake back down, and I look left to look at him, and he's gone. And I'm like, where did he go? And what had happened was his seat had unlocked, and just like in an old school car, like when your seat unlocks and you roll back, he rolled back in the seat, and you can go pretty far in that airplane. And he was holding on to the controls to pull himself forward. And I'm like, whoa, I have the airplane. And
he's like, whoa, you have the airplane. I've heard this story.
Yeah.
I've heard this story on this
podcast
classic before.
And that's not in the technical manual, but it's a thing. And somebody in training had said, hey, watch out for that. That's a thing that airplane can do. And the mentoring that I got. And one of my side notes on that is there are certain people who don't handle it well when you go off script. Things go really well as long as everything goes exactly according to plan. But rule 2 of combat is it will never, ever go according to plan. You're always going to have that fog and the friction, and things are going to go sideways. And you're looking for the types of people who are going to be like, oh, okay, well, things are sideways now, so let's fix this sideways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like how you said that, Jim. And that's somebody who has the ability to react, and somebody who has the ability to critically problem solve under pressure. And I don't want to speak for you guys, but I would say in law enforcement, Mike, especially, just because you get information on dispatch does not necessarily mean that is what you're going to see when you arrive on scene.
Yeah,
correct?
That's a huge thing. Yep.
And in Afghanistan, we would get what's called a 9-line, and I can't discuss all 9 pieces of information on that sheet. However, we would sprint out to a helicopter, and we would get a sheet that had 9 pieces of information from our intelligence office. And we would fly in based off that information, and what we had was what we had. And I would say about 75% of the time, what we had on that sheet was not what we were flying into. If it said there were no enemy there, we were probably going to see enemy. If it said that our patient had a gunshot in the right shoulder, we could potentially see a gunshot wound to the heart.
So his leg got blown
was
off. Got
inaccurate. Everything was inaccurate. So you had to be ready for anything. You do not want to completely set up for what is on that 9 line. You want to be prepared for what's on that 9 line, no doubt, but you want to be ready for anything. And so you don't want to get complacent on standards. You don't want to get complacent on just training for the known and just being ready for the known. We're looking for athletes and we're looking for people that are ready to tackle the unknown.
Yeah. So the 9 line, gets you thinking, right? It's almost a mental strategy to start asking yourself questions.
It does. And for the listeners out there, the 9 line, you're looking at location, you're looking at a basic synopsis of what you're getting into, how many patients you have, if there's enemy in the area, etc.
Yeah. So the mental toughness thing is something we can talk about all day. Really, that's probably an episode on its own, and maybe we can have you back for something like that. But I want to talk about the athletic performance stuff because I think you've got a really unique perspective on that, being not only coming from the special operations side of things, but also college football.
Wait. I have one question, I'm sorry, on the resilience mental toughness thing.
Go ahead, Jim.
Let's do it.
To what extent can it be taught? To what extent is it just something you got to have?
You're either born with it or you're not, in my opinion. You can bring it out of somebody. You can make the best out of them, but they either have it or they don't, in my opinion. There can be a significant event in their life that sparks it and brings it out of them, but really what it comes down to is being able to assess that person and being able to realize whether or not they have what it takes.
Now, when you say you can bring it out of somebody, because I think this is big because I've worked with, and Jim and I both have worked with cadets. We'll say teenagers that have been aspiring into some of these jobs, and we've tried to mentor them into being successful. And I think for the most part, they already had what it takes somewhere inside of them. But when you talk about bringing it out, would you agree or disagree with the idea that at some point in that person's life, right? Like they either have it or they don't. I get that. But at some point in their life, they're going to come to that fork in the road. And they're going to have to decide, like the going is going to get tough. And they're going to have to say like, okay, this is what they were talking about in those books that I read or whatever. And they've got to decide like, yeah, this is the time I'm going to do it. I'm going to stick with it or not.
Really, yeah, absolutely. And that's where motivation comes into play and being able to have that one thing that drives you through. And for me, that was my father and my faith in Christ that drove me through. And I knew, like I said earlier, I couldn't go home to my father's face for failure. I joined Pararescue essentially because of his guidance and his stories and his recommendations. So what's that one thing that somebody has that can help drive them through? Sometimes that can be even more powerful than that personality type.
Yeah. And I imagine it's different for everybody. I know for me, it was empowering to see when I was going through the PJ stuff and before I got cut, it was empowering to me to see other people quit. Like I saw people quit and I'm like, that's the one thing I said I was not going to do. And that's not going to happen.
Right. And I want to say something to the listeners out there regarding quitting. There's a study that we've done regarding positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, and it carries over into what's called target fixation. And target fixation, I want to use an example of parachuting. Parachuting in the desert in between Tucson and Phoenix in particular, where there's a high density of saguaro cacti. If you are coming in on your final approach, you're at about 500 feet, and you've got desert with a lot of cacti, okay? If you focus in on a cactus that's near you and you say, don't hit the cactus, Well, your mind is going to focus on hitting that cactus, okay? The better approach and the better mindset and the better speech to tell your brain is to find that open desert and say, land in the open desert, land in the open desert, land in the open desert. I played college baseball, actually, before I played college football. And I noticed in college baseball that whenever my coach would stand next to my catcher, I would get super nervous about hitting him. And I would say, don't hit my coach with the ball. Don't hit the coach with the ball. And I would keep throwing the ball towards the coach. And I couldn't understand why. And I realized later on in my life, it was because I was focusing on the coach and not the catcher's glove. And so I would challenge all of you, when it comes down to reinforcement, when it comes down to leadership, make sure that you come at it with a positive approach. And so if you're telling yourself, don't quit, don't quit, don't quit all the time, your mind is going to be focused on quitting. So the proper mindset and the proper thing to tell yourself is get through it, succeed. Don't focus on the negative, focus on the positive. What do you think, Jim? Can you touch on that?
I like that a lot. I wish I could top that with something, but I can't. You know, and at various times, Mike and I have talked about kind of the mental rehearsal and the mind game and stuff, and keeping your head right. And yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
I just know as a pilot, you know, you've been in situations where you have to land in a certain area and there may be hazards or there may be certain things that you don't want to hit, and you can't focus on those things. You got to focus on that green zone. You got to focus on the area that you need to land.
I joke with a lot of cops. There's a lot of lesson plans that talk about this positive self-talk stuff. And I always joke with them, you know, positive self-talk is not like standing in front of the mirror in the morning and telling yourself that
I'm smart.
And it's not singing Kumbaya.
I am beautiful and I am strong and I am, you know, that's not it. It's talking yourself through a problem. And I very, very vividly remember, and I know Jason makes it sound really easy because he's a stud, but in buddy breathing, when you're getting, you know, at this indoctrination course, when they're quote unquote splashing you, and by splashing, what he really means is trying to drown you, and you're passing the snorkel back with your buddy, and I remember constantly repeating to myself over and over in my head, you got this, you got this, you got this, relax, relax, relax. Get your buddy air. And you pass the snorkel and you get your buddy air and you just focus on the task. And before you know it, with that focus and staying positive, like you got this, just
you were pumping yourself up.
Yeah.
You weren't telling yourself don't fail. You were telling yourself succeed.
And by the end of it, before you know it, they're tapping on your head, right? They're like, boom, you're done. You made it. And you're like, holy crap.
Well, there's a side note in there, which is the get your buddy air thing, and the selflessness, which is a core part of rescue, right? The motto that others may live. It's about the other guy. It's about the other guy. And get your buddy air. You're going to force that snorkel out of your mouth and into that guy's mouth, and you're going to have to trust that he's going to do the same for you. And I think less about yourself. Think more about your task. I think that will help a lot.
Task focus, I think, is a big, not that, you know, and I agree there's a selflessness part of it, but because if you get your buddy air, then he's going to be calmer and have more presence of mind, and he's going to be able to take care of you back. Right. But like, it's very pragmatic. You know, it's staying positive, and it's not like Jason said, it's not about landing in the cactus. It's about landing in the clear.
And I'm sure Jim can touch on this. When you're under stress and you're communicating with the pilot and you're in the zone, you want to be able to be calm, and you want to be able to communicate to that pilot in a calm manner. And these pilots have a ton going on. And shout to you, Jim, and shout to you to all the rescue pilots out there. These guys are just as selfless as anybody else. They're flying into the zone under fire. They're sitting there in a cockpit, defenseless, taking fire, dropping guys off in the zone, reacting to all kinds of communication, talking to the Joint Personnel Recovery Center, talking to CCT, talking to JTACs, talking to air traffic controllers, whatever it is. They've got 5 different stations going on. So shout to you guys. I mean, talk about being able to be calm under pressure and being able to stay positive. I mean, those guys really got it going on. So thanks for everything you guys do, Jim.
I love getting to breathe the same air as some of the dudes I get to work with. That's what I'll say on that.
So That's awesome stuff, and I appreciate hearing from both of you guys on that. I want to talk a little bit, just to keep us moving forward here, about athletic performance stuff, because like I said, I think Jason's got a unique perspective on this, and more importantly, there are a lot of people who are probably listening to this who are at some point in their life going to try out for something. And it could be, the police academy, it could be high school football for all I care. But the idea is, athletic performance is something that when you know that you're going into something that's going to be physically demanding, there's a lot of myths, there's a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of snake oil and fairy dust, and there's a lot of information out there. And so hopefully Jason can help us wade through some of that. Can you break down for us what your fundamental thoughts are on athletic performance in terms of the types of workouts to do and diversifying your efforts, and go.
Sure. So first, a lot of people don't know what they want to do with their performance, right? So they train, but they don't necessarily know what career field is best for them or what they're going to use their training for. Is it going to be for SWAT? Is it going to be for Border Patrol? Is it going to be for Homeland Security, Air Force, Army? Are you going to try out for the U of A football team? What is it going to be? What is your performance going to be? Well, I think that first, the first step you want to take is being realistic with yourself and analyzing yourself on what your purpose is and what you do best and what you offer the world, okay? If you're 5'1" and you weigh 110 pounds, you're not going to be able to put a 300-pound person or a 250-pound person with full kit on your back and run them off the battlefield. You have to be realistic with yourself. Look into career fields where a 5'1", 110-pound person can be effective. Unless you plan on putting 50 or 60 pounds of raw muscle on and still being able to perform at that level, you cannot do a job that requires that. I'm sorry, you genetically cannot. So that being said, be realistic with yourself. Find out what career is best for you. And then from there, you have to be able to set up a game plan for yourself on how you're going to achieve those goals. And a lot of people struggle with plateaus, whether it be for bench pressing, whether it be for push-ups, running, swimming. They struggle with getting to a certain point and their body planes out and they can't break it. Well, a simple answer for breaking plateaus is to keep your body guessing, whether it be adding repetitions, changing weights, changing routines, changing the time of day you work out, getting on a nutrition plan. You have to be able to get your body guessing so that you can break those plateaus. That's how your body works, and that's how muscle build works. Whenever you go into the gym and you do a hypertrophy exercise or you do a hypertrophy regime, hypertrophy meaning muscle growth, you are tearing your muscles down and you're creating micro tears where your body has to replenish those tears with nutrients. If your body does not have the protein fibers to replenish those nutrients, it cannot grow the muscle. So make sure that you're replenishing your body with the proper nutrients, the proper amounts of protein, carbohydrates, etc. Nutrition is just as important as strength training. I think I'm getting off on a tactical tangent here, Mike. So I'll let you guys hop in real quick.
I was actually going to say, so does that mean steroids? But
if your department prescribes them, by all means, or if you turn to 50, go ahead. Jim,
what do you eat?
My wife's lovely crock pot chicken, about 7 pounds a week.
Nicely done.
Holy crap, that's a lot of chicken.
That's a lot of chicken. So when I was training, actually, I ate a lot more red meat and I tried to supplement a little more fat so that I could keep myself insulated more. Now I try to stick to a little more of a lean diet. I'm pretty much working from home now, not operating anymore. But for those of you out there that are looking to operating, just be advised, if you're in the cold or you're wet, you're going to want a little bit of extra fat on your extremities. Otherwise, you will break and your body it will become hypothermic and you'll be a liability to your team.
I'm actually, I feel very well prepared having a little bit of extra fat on me.
Within reason. Don't be using it as an excuse now.
No, Jason's calling me fat. BRB guys, I got to go hit the gym.
Oh.
So can you break down for us what types of workouts you think people should focus on if they're looking for a job in special operations? And I'll expand on that a little bit to say even things like law enforcement, public safety, maybe not football specifically, because that's kind of narrow, but functional job performance wise, what types of workouts should I be doing, and how much diversity do I need in doing that?
Right. So there comes to be a point where you have to analyze whether you need to get gains or you need to maintain what you have. Whenever you are training for a particular career field, which is what we've been focused on this podcast, talking about males and females that are training for SEALs or pararescue, et cetera, you are actively trying to get gains. You are actively trying to become something that you are not. Once you are operating, you may be trying to become something you are not, or you may be trying to maintain. From my experience, most operators are 35, 40 years old, and they are trying to maintain what they have. And so I would say when it comes down to functional workouts for operators in the tactical fields, you got to make sure that you're mobile, you got to make sure you're flexible, and you got to make sure you're quick and fast. You don't want to be too big, you don't want to be too bogged down, but at the same time, you got to be able to push weight, you got to be able to breach, you have to be able to take your comrade and throw him on your back and run him off the battlefield and run him or her to safety. So it is important that you have weight on. So doing Arnold-style lifting, doing isometric training, bodybuilding is important, but at the same time, supplementing that circuit training in there is important as well. I know a lot of guys hit on yoga. Yoga is important, but just be advised, if you're doing the type of yoga, there are a lot of different types of yoga. If you're doing the type of yoga that has muscle strain and you're doing that on top of workouts that you're already doing, that may not be the wisest thing for you. The idea of yoga is to maintain your flexibility and to increase your mobility. So just make sure that as an operator that you have that longevity, because as an operator, you are more valuable to your team if you can operate for a long time. Otherwise, they're just going to try to replace you with the young guy.
What about one thing that I really push on cops is, and again, part of, you talked earlier about identifying your mission and what that's going to be, and the difference between a 20-minute evolution versus a 6-second play on a football field and stuff. But I really push this idea with cops that anaerobic conditioning, you really have to put some emphasis on for a police officer who might find themselves in a fight for their life that's going to last 3 to 5, maybe 7 minutes, something like that. So there's a diversity element there. Yeah, you want to be big and strong. I think the anaerobic stuff comes into play, but if you had to pick one type of workout, if let's say you're a fat donut eating cop, for example, or
I'd throw him in the water to see what he's made of.
Or, well, okay, fair enough. Or a donut eating fluffy Air Force guy. That's not a PJ. I'm just throwing something out there. If you had to pick one type of workout that, hey, if you're only going to work out this, 20, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 or 3 times a week, what are you going to get done?
Yeah, I'd have you do about 10 minutes of activation period, warming up, activating your rotator cuffs, your hips, your lower body.
You just made me think of something. Remind me.
And then after that, I'd have you doing some type of upper body activation, so some type of pull-ups, maybe weighted pull-ups. I'd have you doing incline treadmill sprints. I'd have you doing your lower body, your core, lower abdominals, hanging on a pull-up bar, doing leg lifts, flutter kicks, things that are strengthening your core. It's very important to strengthen your core as an athlete. Lunges are excellent. Hang cleans are excellent. Deadlifts are excellent as long as you are doing functional deadlifts, that being hex bar deadlifts. I do want to get off on a tangent on deadlifts because I know a lot of old school lifters are big on it. I know a lot of guys out there are religious on deadlifting. They love to get in there and pick up weight. It makes a lot of sense to them. But one thing I would challenge you to analyze is, in the field, how many times have you lifted a heavy object with your palms facing you? Think about it just for a second. In the field, how many times have you lifted a heavy object with your palms facing you? I would argue that you have never done it. every time that you lift a heavy object, your palms are facing away from you. And when we deadlift, typically we either have both palms facing towards us or one facing away and one facing towards us. So hex bar deadlifts has become extremely popular in the Department of Defense in analyzing athletes. However, are you going to take a recruiter, or are you going to take somebody that has no athletic training and just grab hex bars and throw them in the back of a truck and bring them all around the country and expect people to do a proper hex bar deadlift? I don't think so. So being able to throw hex bar deadlifts into an assessment test is an extremely difficult thing, although it's very functional. But anyways, to get back on track, Mike, I would say lunging, incline treadmill sprints are extremely important. Being able to see your resiliency, so whether that be in the water, whether that be testing yourself on skills in between sets when you're stressed, when your heart rate is up. Bench pressing is not necessarily as important as people think. Push-ups are not necessarily as important as people think. But being able to pull yourself up, being able to handle your own body weight, and being able to take somebody and put them on your back and run around with it without being injured is extremely important. So any exercise that supplements that or complements picking somebody up and running with it is extremely important for a police officer or law enforcement officer.
So you actually brought up two good points, Jason, that I want to hit on about physical training stuff. The first one had to do with decision making and getting your heart rate up, and maybe this is something you've touched on with your human performance research, but I have made the case at my department that just getting your heart rate up. So let me back up. We do this. We have this analogy that we talk about, Jim and I, about when your adrenaline hits, you lose 100 IQ points, and I see it really well in cops. You know, your physical demand or your physical strain doesn't have to get very high before you start making poor decisions. And what I've seen is a lot of police trainers do this thing where, okay, we're going to go do a bunch of burpees, push-ups and sprint down the field and back, and that's going to be to simulate stress. And then we're going to bring you into a scenario and have you make decisions. And it seems to me that lacks the cortisol and adrenaline dump that happens when self-preservation and that sympathetic nervous response comes into play. Do you have any insight on that and making decisions under stress?
Well, for me, Mike, what I've noticed over time is that I perform better under stress. And so I will subconsciously create stress in my life to push myself to perform better. It's a strange thing. And I noticed it especially when I got back from Afghanistan, just dealing with that ops tempo, and what that demanded of you, and just how perfection was needed, whether it be how you staged your medical gear, your weapon, or whether it be what we talked about earlier, having a game plan for your 9-line. It was all about perfection. So I prefer to perform under stress because it keeps me accountable. It makes me perform better.
So something in there that you hit on that I want to touch on is the warm-ups thing. And you talked about you getting, and this was going back a minute or two, but you talked about how, so if someone came to the gym and you were going to get them ready and get them into like one type of workout or something, you talked about some of the mobility, and I don't remember what word you used.
Activation, maybe.
Activation was, yeah. And one thing that I learned at INDOC actually was about dynamic stretching. And not doing the like bend forward and touch your toes for a minute at a time, and actually like getting yourself moving as a warm up and flexibility, like doing some flexibility stuff. But the idea was you're doing movements that mimicked the activity that you were going to be doing next as a warm up. And that is one of the things that I think people have gotten wrong about physical training in general. Like you see people that they're getting ready to play football, for example, and they're out there laying on the grass, stretching out their legs and, quad stretches and stuff like that. Can you speak to that and what you think the correct answer is?
Right. So rule of thumb for me is dynamic stretching is holding a position for 3 seconds or less. You want to stick to doing dynamic stretching before the workout, before the performance, and stick to doing static stretching after the performance. Static stretching being something that you're holding for more than 3 seconds, typically 10, 15, up to 30, up to 60 seconds. So static stretching is ideally for after your performance because it will tear your muscles down and it will cause them to rebuild back up better. If you static stretch before your workout, you can actually cause fatigue. So the difference between activation, dynamic stretching, and static stretching being activation is where you're actually going out and using those muscles. So a lot of people jog to warm up. So jogging to warm up would be an example of activation versus going and pulling on your quad or bending down and touching your toes would be a dynamic or a static stretch.
And you think, so a dynamic or a static stretch. So this is what I remember. Doing things like leg swings instead of sitting on the ground touching your toes.
Right. So you want to do things that are moving, do things that you're holding for less than 3 seconds before you work out. And then after you work out, being static stretching, you're holding for 10 seconds plus.
Gotcha. Cool.
So you mentioned that you're doing some work with SOCOM. What you doing?
Right. So right now, the military is hungry for special operators. In a world where automation and satellites are taking a charge, the use for conventional forces is becoming negligible as we need special operators in the field making conscious decisions and being able to strike quickly, strike from different angles, and strike from different platforms. So the need for special operations forces is greater than ever right now. So the biggest thing that my company does, SOCOM Athlete, is that lead providing assistance and being able to gather strong athletes that have what it takes for pararescue, for Navy SEALs, combat control, career fields like that, and being able to send them to the right recruiters, being able to facilitate their process, their game plan for development, telling them when they're ready and when they need to enlist.
If you could sit down with a room full of soft wannabes, guys who want to be SEALs, want to be PJs, want to be special forces, want to be whatever, what would you tell them?
Right now, I would tell them to be comfortable with the unknown and to not consolidate to the pass test / entry standards. The pass test being a 1.5 mile run, 500 meter swim, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups for time. That is your bare minimum test to gain entry standards. And that is your quantifiable, tangible ability to get tested by the DoD and see if you have what it takes. So that being said, a 1.5 mile run, 500 meter swim, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups for time, does that evaluate your ability to effectively operate? I don't think it does, because operating involves sprinting. It involves putting people on your back, as we've talked about in this podcast, and running with them. It involves being able to communicate, being able to move, hold your breath underwater, tie knots underwater, whatever it may be. This is a bare minimum ability to assess your ability to see if you have what it takes to train. So what I would tell everyone in the room is to not consolidate to the entry standards, but to train for what's beyond the entry standards.
I remember when I tested for SWAT the first time, it took me a couple tries to get into SWAT. And I thought, okay, the obstacle course, yeah, no problem. I can do that run and the obstacles in 10 minutes and 30 seconds. Yeah. But I underestimated what the school was going to be like. And that went a step farther, you know, and the same can be said about NDOC or anything like that, is that, yeah, you might be able to pass the weekly evals at NDOC, but it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to deal with the day in and the day out. And throughout the weeks at NDOC, the standard that we did all week was the next week's evaluation standard, right? And eval day was like the easy day. You know, you got to Monday when you were going to do your WaterCon and all your evals and stuff, and they didn't mess with you. It was just a test. But you've been doing that standard every day up until then, like it was no big deal. So, like I said, the bare minimum, yeah, I mean, it's the bare minimum. You can pass at that level, but I don't think you should fixate on it. So I agree with what Jason's saying.
One of my favorite sayings with tests is, I never want to be in a fair fight. Like, that's basic military doctrine, is I am not in the business of fair fights. I don't want to be in a fair fight with the Taliban.
Well
I don't want to be in a fair fight with the Russians. And I'll be damned if I'm going to be in a fair fight with the Air Force PT test. Fuck that. Right.
Well said. And if that's all you're training for, you're going to be a liability, right? If you just meet the bare minimum standards, then you join and you leave yourself and your life up to the Air Force to develop you to the level that you hope to be, versus joining up to the level that you need to be and knowing that you're not a liability and that you'll be an asset to your team.
Yep.
So taking aside the PT and the mental toughness stuff, what else do you think a guy that's trying to get into a special or elite job, what should they be reading? What should they be studying? What do they need to know?
Yeah, you also need to be available, and you need to have availability. If you have a cancerous relationship, or you have something that's going to bog you down, just know that when you're in the most stressful situation in your life, or that your life has presented to you at that time, being your training or your selection, that time where you're under the water, or you're doing that buddy breathing as Mike was talking about earlier, where somebody is putting water in your snorkel and dunking you down and trying to drown you, you're going to find excuses to want to back out of that. You're going to want to find excuses to want to quit. Well, my wife probably didn't want me to do this anyway, or I had that scholarship waiting on me at this college. Don't have any other options. One option, and that is success. One option, that is to pass your pipeline, pass your training. There is no other option. And so that's what I would challenge you guys to do the most, is analyze your life and see if there's any baggage or any cancer that you need to get rid of before you try your goal. Because a goal like this, it requires everything you have. There are no other options. There is no secondary. This is your primary.
I think that's a great point, and I think that's a thing where the younger generations tend to struggle, and that's not a knock on millennials. Technically, everyone talking to you right now on this podcast probably counts as a millennial. But I have noticed that a lot of our generation struggles with commitment, and understanding that some of these jobs are freaking total commitment jobs. Being a PJ is a total commitment job. Being a pilot, especially depending on what type of pilot you are, is a full commitment job. And in my class in pilot training, there were like 10, 12 of us. Of the guys who were married or engaged at the beginning, 0 who made it were still married or engaged. They were either broken up or they didn't make it. Now, that's one very small sample size. It was just my little class, but it's kind of an indicator of what he's talking about.
And it's not to say that is the measure, right? Like,
no,
that's not. That's not to say that you can't have a successful relationship or successful marriage that withstands that, but you have to understand, and your spouse or your partner or whatever, your family, your friends, the people who you actually care about in life have to understand that is part of your identity, that this is what you're doing, this is what you care about, this is what you're about. You know,
and it's going to have a strain on them, and which is more than what's on the brochure, and in dumber ways than what's on the brochure, right?
Yeah.
And Mike said a word identity there, and I really like how he said that. And what's your identity? What are you about? Are you experimenting? Are you just giving it a shot? Are you trying to see if you have what it takes, or is it your identity? Do you really know that this is what you're meant to do and what you do effectively?
Yeah. You need to have that fact-finding, do some soul searching and figure out, are you just in this so that people will respect you and think that you're some kind of badass? Because every special operator type that I've ever met, that's not what they're about. They're about the mission. They're not about proving something to their friends. They're about, the total package. And that's, I think, a conversation you have to have with yourself before you get into something like this.
Right. And Mike, shout out to you, man. I got to do some time with Tucson SWAT recently and get some awareness on the medical task force that they're putting up and standing up. A pretty incredible operation they have. And Mike's a guy who is going to go 100% at everything he does, and he's going to go above and beyond and try to be the best at what he does and bring as much energy to his team as possible. And I think that's incredible. So anyways, Mike, shout to you. And when it comes down to performance, guys, just understand that you don't want to train for just the bare minimums. You have to train for what's beyond. So, Mike, we had this saying in pararescue, 99% beret, 1% PJ for guys that were just looking for the glamour and looking to get that beret, but really didn't want any piece of the job. So can you touch on maybe some guys that you've seen that maybe just want that badge and want the uniform and want the status with that, but don't necessarily want what it takes and what that all that comes with?
I think a lot of people show up on day one and decide, and they want to be a cop, right? They want the badge, they want to chase bad guys, they want the action, they want the guns, they want to, like, this is my favorite example is people say, I want to drive fast and carry a gun. Okay, perhaps they lack the personal responsibility that comes with it. And what I mean by that is, the kind of person that takes seriously the responsibility or the authority that has been invested in them, that hey, when that school shooting happens, you're the guy. Like, that's you. This is your day. This is your Super Bowl or your, whatever. Like, the department doesn't prepare you for that. The state doesn't prepare you for that. Nothing prepares you for that but yourself. And so my take on it is you have to decide ahead of time why you're into this. What's your shtick?
I have a thing on this. Well, we're on the topic of motivation and finding your core motivation and make sure you have the right motivation. Jason started out talking about using his dad as motivation and the inspiration from his dad. And I think that the way he approached that was good and healthy. However, I've seen a lot of classmates at the Air Force Academy who went to the academy because dad told them to. Or we'll buy you a car if you go off to a service academy or get our ROTC scholarship or whatever. And I knew a number of kids who were basically suicidal because they didn't really want to be there. They were doing it for dad or to impress dad or something like that. And that's not to knock Jason's story, which I think is good. I want to distinguish, though, Jason's experience from that negative use of having a parent role model, inspiration, and motivation.
It's kind of that, and obviously Jason can speak to his own spin on this, but like, to me, it's the difference between that identity thing, personal responsibility versus obligation. I'm here because I gotta be, and I look at the badge thing as like this. There's a very superficial thing that I see with cops sometimes where they show up to the police academy and they're like, because you see the same thing, like, oh, my dad was a cop and like he wants me to be a cop because that's the only thing I could do to make my dad proud. And so that's why they're there.
I think it ties back to what we were discussing a few minutes ago about making sure you're doing what you're meant to do and making sure you're being honest with yourself on your abilities and how you're going to impact the world the most. When I decided that pararescue was a career field for me, I had been playing college baseball, and I was in a very tough spot in my life. My father was a home builder. This was 2008. The recession had just hit us. My mom had got an operation called a hysterectomy where she got her uterus taken out. It almost killed her several times. They were giving her all types of medications, and she was essentially a human medication experiment. And so my father, living in Arizona, as we did at the time, was unable to commute back to Florida to run his business while my mom was dying. And all this was happening while I was playing baseball at Grant County University in 2008 on scholarship, and my arm stopped working. So I didn't know where to go in life. And the only thing I knew or where to turn was to try to become a Navy SEAL. And so I started the process talking to a Navy recruiter. And about a week later, I had a really rough night. I mean, the worst night of my life at the time. I was 20 years old. And I decided to say a prayer. And it had been a long time since I had done that. I was very sincere about it, and I asked God for guidance. I called him out. I said, if you're real, I want you to tell me whatever you want me to do with my life tomorrow, and I want you to tell me through my father and have him call me the precise moment that I wake up. And I've told this story on several podcasts. I mean, I don't see how I could hold this in. It's an incredible story. It was a miracle. I can't not tell it to people. I challenged God that night, and I challenged him to tell me what he wanted me to do. And that moment when I wake up the next morning, 11:31 a.m., I had a missed call from my father. And without any hesitation, when I called him back, he told me, son, I want you to go down to Tucson with me and meet somebody named Chief Master Sergeant James Sanchez, the 306 Rescue Squadron, Tucson, Arizona. He's a pararescueman. There was one class ahead of me. And I knew right then and there that it was my path, my calling to become a PJ. It took 20 years for me to figure that out. It took a whole lot of failure. It took a whole lot of unfortunate things to happen in my life, but I knew without a doubt 100% that pararescue was for me. Being a SEAL would have been more glamorous. I could have gone into a bar and told anyone that I had a trident, that I was a SEAL. They would have known immediately what that was. They would have bought me a drink. They would have introduced me to their daughter. They would have tried to invite me over to their house to stay for the weekend, right? But instead, you say you're a PJ, and they say, what is that, pajamas? And then by the time you try to explain to them what your job is, you end up sounding arrogant after you say you skydive, you shoot, you mountain climb, you save lives, whatever it is. So part of what comes with being a PJ is being a humble, quiet professional. And it comes very natural when people don't understand what your job is. So anyways, long story short, I knew pararescue was for me. And my first choice was to be a SEAL, but that was not what I was meant to do. So I ponied up and did what I was meant to do, and I followed in my father's footsteps, and I was very proud to do so.
I want to highlight the quiet professional part of that, because first of all, in my line of work, it's not something you see among cops very often. I can tell you that. And I think back to my short little time in the Air Force, and like I remember one of the things that you do at INDOC is you carry around a really heavy log. You guys might have seen the TV shows or something, but you carry around a big telephone pole. It's a real heavy log. Or if you're lucky and you get to a certain point through that course, that log turns into a rope that you carry. And that's like it's to symbolize teamwork. You know, everyone carries the team rope, and you'd see these other guys on base that would say, who are you? what are you guys doing carrying around that rope or that log or that whatever? And we tell them, we're the Air Force Lumberjacks, or we're the Air Force Tug of War team. You know,
I'm sure we have that.
Yeah, kind of downplay it. We probably do have it, by the way.
And really, what I think it comes down to is just staying humble and being quiet and being professional. And life is very humbling. I have not seen somebody that has served in combat and has seen trauma in combat come back over here and brag about it openly. You just don't see it. And somebody who does, typically it's an insecurity issue because they really haven't done it. So back to that identity thing, man, I think that's big. And guys who have done it, they don't really want to talk about it because there's nothing glamorous about combat. There's nothing poetic about death. There's nothing poetic about destruction.
I think there's a caveat to that, though. It's not being poetic or glamorous about yourself, but I think that everyone has to find some peace with with that identity part of it, you know, and it's something that I've certainly seen it, you know, in every interaction I've had with you, Jason. I see it with Jim. I see it with every guy on my team, you know, about that identity is that these are principles that these guys are committed to, you know, it's that personal responsibility thing. And that's if I was in a position to offer advice to anyone that wants to be someone special, whether that's a special operations guy, which I am not, or a cop or a public safety person or any military type, whatever. It's just to find and make peace with that identity. And I think that's important. It doesn't mean that you have to be seeking glamour about it. It doesn't mean that you have to be
comfortable with who you are and what you do.
Yeah. But you should also, and pride is not the word, but you should also like readily accept that what you're asking of yourself, or what you're telling yourself you're prepared for, is that like, hey, these are the things that I believe in, and these are the things that I'm willing to set my life on the line for.
Absolutely. And there's a Bible verse I love to go to, and it's Colossians 3:23, and it says, whatever you do, do it with all your heart as of working for God and not man. And I think it's important that as we strive for our goals in life, we don't try to compare ourselves to other people. We compare ourselves to ourselves and what we expect from ourselves and what we know what we know we can accomplish.
Jason, can you talk to us about where we are and where we're headed as far as the current research, and if there are any emerging ideas or technologies that we should be keeping our eyes on?
Yeah, keep your eyes on stress biomarkers and monitors for being able to analyze certain hormones that your body puts off whenever it's under stress. And these monitors can assess that, and they can tell you when you need to withhold from training or intensify your training. These monitors can track data and continue to track that data and recommend intervention. So whether it be having your team strapped up to monitors, or whether it be having your team on some type of diversified program, unified program, having a nutritionist, just be on the lookout for every type of team out there having a program for being better at what they do.
Very cool.
All right, Jason. So we've talked about a lot, and I know Jim brought it up. We touched just briefly on the SOCOM athlete thing. Can you talk to me about your project with SOCOM athlete and what you're trying to accomplish, and why people might benefit from getting in touch with you?
Special operations career fields are in high demand right now amongst athletes, and a lot of these athletes don't know what career field is best for them. And to caveat on that, they don't necessarily know how to prepare for whatever career field that they choose. And to caveat on top of that, how do they know when they're ready to enlist? Who do they talk to? Which recruiter do they talk to? So SOCOM Athlete is essentially the one-stop shop for somebody who is interested in special operations from the moment they gain interest, from the moment they enlist, whether that be the equipment they need, having a mentor, having an assessment process, having a game plan, having somebody to talk to. We are that resource, and we are America's #1 resource right now for providing everything somebody needs to get from their interest to enlistment.
I like that. There's so much bad advice out there. I remember I was getting ready to go off to the Air Force Academy, and a guy takes me aside, was like, Jim, you need to eat a lot of soup. I swear to God, the guy took me aside. He was dead serious. Eat a lot of soup. And I'm like, okay, thanks for that. I'm gonna
I
go
would have
work
believed
out
him
now.
if he said, drink more protein shakes.
And really one of the advantages of doing this research in the human performance realm is taking things like eat more soup and saying, okay, what's the data behind that? What backs it up? Can we take some science and can we make it relevant that an athlete needs to eat more soup per se to get where they need to be? Very well said.
One
Jim.
clearly is the real deal, and also has done the research to back up the fact that he's the real deal. So that's badass, and I hope people look into it.
Yeah. So
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
And so, Jason, you're doing some events all over the country, basically, right, for getting guys ready for jobs in special operations?
Right. So I'm administering these PSTs, and then as stated, are the PSTs 1.5 mile run, 500 meter swim, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups for time.
It's PSTs with quotey fingers, or
Right. So the PST stands for Personal Selection Test or Personal Assessment Selection Test, Personal Fitness Test, PFT, whatever you want to call it. And it's the DoD's universal standard for analyzing somebody who wants to go into special operations and seeing if they have what it takes for entry. So we'll administer the PST, and then we'll go beyond that, and we'll do what's called a Hell Half Day right after the PST. And the Hell Half Day is a simulation, kind of a combination of Navy SEAL buds and pararescue indoctrination. The idea is to present to these athletes situations of problem solving, being under the water, being in cold water, interacting as a team, having leaders, the unknown factors as we discussed earlier. So you can have these assessment scores on a PST. You can see how somebody stacks up with their physical abilities, but how are you going to assess their mental abilities? How are you going to assess how they communicate, how they interact with the team, how they deal with cold water, how they deal with putting a body on their back and running down the beach? And so that's really the idea of the Hell Half Day, is to give them the full assessment, not just the tangibles, but really what's beneath the surface. And so we travel around the country and we do these PSTs and these Hell Half Days, and then the day after we offer development, which is essentially coaching and saying these are your weaknesses and these are how we're going to fix them. So we like to travel around to demographics in the coastal regions. Typically you see guys in the coastal regions and females that are a little more versed in swimming, so careers like CCT, combat control, Navy SEALs, pararescue. In these coastal regions, people are going to have a little more experience in the water. And so we want to deal with somebody who is a little bit on their way versus somebody who is a beginner.
And that's not to say that you can't go to a pool or a lake for that matter and get yourself ready. But I think the important part is if you're serious about this kind of thing, this is a good place to start. I think the resilience, the mental gut check is a big deal. And so checking out something like this is probably a good place to start, because you can be a stud on the metrics, right? On the 1.5 mile run, push-ups, pull-ups, sit-ups, whatever. That doesn't measure the mental toughness and the resilience. And so this is a good place to start. And so Jason's putting these programs together to test you a little bit.
And Mike, if I may, these programs are not closed off to law enforcement, to any tacticianer out there. All of you, come on out, be a part of this family, compete, see what it's like to get put through mental resilience, test yourself, see what you're made of. You're welcome to come out. We'd love to have you.
And how do we find you? How do we find these events?
Yeah, check us out on www.socomathlete.com or on Instagram @socomathlete.
Well, if you're too afraid of going to SOCOM Athletes events, you can always watch from afar.
Through
with
some
the cool
baller binoculars from Right On Optics.
With a cool scope or some binoculars from Right On Optics, our sponsor. Go to rightonoptics.com. You could use the discount code TACTangents to get 15% off. You can also get with them if you might qualify for any kind of military or public safety discounts. They've got a pretty good deal going. But make sure either way that they know that we sent you. And we did an episode with them recently, so make sure you check that out if you want to learn something about scopes, optics, binos. Pretty good stuff. Brady really broke it down for us, I think. And even if you already own a scope, I think there's some good info in there for you.
Dude's you want to learn about. His company's legit. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm pretty excited to have them on board with us. So
yeah,
check out Right On Optics.
That's right. So absolutely, if you want to learn about focal planes and reticles and zoom, objective lenses, all of those things, listen to our episode that we did with Brady from Right On. All right, remember that we put out new episodes on the 1st and the 15th of every month. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter @TacTangents. Our email address is info@tacticaltangents.com. If you like what we got going on, you want to support the podcast, go over to Patreon, give us $1 for each new episode. You can subscribe there. It'll be a regular contribution for each new show that we release. If you don't want to do a regular contribution, you can also go over to GoFundMe and make a one-time donation there. We appreciate the support. Just remember, if you don't want to contribute with money, that's cool. Spread the word, share with your friends. It's the best advertising that we can get. And that's all we got for tonight. Be sure to check out Jason and his page at SOCOM Athlete on Instagram and SOCOMathlete.com.
Hey, Mike, Jim, pleasure. Thanks for having me on. God bless you guys. Have a great night. Be safe out there.
Jason, I'm glad we found you. I loved your insights, and I loved just the down-to-earth way you explain it. It's awesome.
Thanks, Jim. Thanks for everything you've done for the rescue community. God bless, man. Have a great night.
All right. Good talk.